Hello, and welcome to Mapping the College Audition, a podcast where we explore the landscape of the college theater world and try to demystify this daunting audition process. As ever, I am your host, Charlie Murphy, director of MTCA, that's Musical Theater College Auditions, and today we have got a bargain of a show lined up for you. Josh Grisetti from Cal State Fullerton is on the show in what I think is a really great episode. My partner walked by as I was editing this and she commented, he is really articulate about his program. I was not articulate with my articulateness there, to which I wholeheartedly agreed. Today on the show, we get into the changes at CSU Fullerton that they made to customize their program, why they shifted the audition and lost the cut, creativity with their showcase process. Josh shares some bold and very aggregatable opinions about the cost of training. We talk about the awesome location with weather and theater companies nearby, beaches and amusement parks. We talk about breaking out of the mindset of only focusing on quote-unquote top schools, also only focusing on the East Coast, and some audition trends to stay away from. I will also say that this episode is one I've been really excited about releasing since I got the note this summer about a few of our families who are saying they want to hear more West Coast schools. As Josh notes, there certainly are more East Coast schools numerically when you talk about musical theater programs specifically, but that's not to say there aren't a number of great programs we can and will continue to highlight all over the country. That map is far from complete. In terms of other updates, I really appreciate some of you reaching out to me about being a bit sick last week. I am definitely on the mend, though the revolving door of daycare illnesses is far from complete, I know. It's been a really great September in general, I'll say, with the college process. Many of our seniors are filming their pre-screens and or preparing to do so. And we've really started meeting a lot of great juniors who are hungry for the process as well. And that's always such a gratifying part of my job, getting to meet students who are really hungry to do this, who are ready to put in the work and chase this dream. It is not easy, but it is an incredible journey. So with that, let's get to Josh Grisetti and hear a bit more about Cal State Fullerton. Well, I am so excited to be joined by Josh Grisetti. Josh has a high school degree from UNCSA and a BFA from Boston Conservatory. He's been on Broadway in Something Rotten, It Should Have Been You with our wonderful Ann Nathan, and Neil Simon's Broadway Bound, which sounds like an ironic title given the situation. Maybe we're going to get into that story of that a little bit. He's also, I would try to read these national tours, but I don't have the breath support to do all the national tours. So it's like 150 bajillion national tours. He's been in films like The Immigrant, The Namesake. He's been on TV and stuff like Magic, The Gates, Nurse Jackie, and he's currently filming The Marvelous Miss Maisel. As we speak, we're kind of catching him between filming of that. So, Josh, welcome on the pod. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm thrilled to be here and be able to talk about all the doings that we're having over here in California.
You blanched at that national tours like you've done a million, but it looks like it's a paragraph on my page.
Well, if you include like regional theater and international tours, yes.
I see.
Yeah, but really one big national tour, classic American national tour.
I see. Okay, so we're talking about we got Something Rotten on there as the national tour, then it's off Broadway. It's just this is all in one paragraph. But I'm also seeing all the awards for it. You got drama desks, you got OCCs, you got other stuff happening in that world.
Yeah, I had a prolific 20-year run in New York and then moved over to Los Angeles just before the pandemic.
And what's the hats that's happening as we speak?
Well, yeah,
true working artist.
the true working artist. Yeah, it's interesting. I came out to LA specifically because I had been doing almost 2 decades of mostly theater work. You mentioned some film things and TV things that I did in New York, but most of my time was spent doing musical theater and plays off Broadway. And that lifestyle of 8 shows a week, as you know, is a commitment. And the older you get, the more you start thinking, okay, especially once you've checked off those boxes. I think we're all hungry to check off certain boxes. I want to work at this venue or at this level and whatever. And once you've done that, there is no real roadmap. No one tells you after you achieve that dream, then what would you like? So when I had to kind of face that, I was like, I think I'd like to go to LA and get away from winter that happens for 8 months out of the
Mm-hmm.
year in New York, and focus a little more on television. So I came out and I did a pilot and a national commercial out here in the uh, you know probably 5 months that I was here before the shutdown, the infamous shutdown of 2020. And so then while the world was shut down, I got my MFA at Loyola Marymount University, which is a university in a private university in Los Angeles, so that I could teach one day.
Mm-hmm.
And just trying to use my time wisely while the industry was shut down. And lo and behold, this sort of great opportunity came up right in my backyard at Cal State Fullerton, where I'm now the head of the musical theater program. But
Well,
we can get there.
let's dive right into it. No, let's get there. So this is a new position for you, right? You're just newly in this position now, out here proselytizing to us of what Cal State Fullerton has been, and kind of can be under your leadership. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they hired me about a year ago to basically renovate the program. It's been around for decades, and it's kind of been a West Coast beacon for musical theater training, but it has not really been on the national stage. And some of that is logistical. It's a state school, much like several other major
Yep.
musical
We
theater
love state
programs.
schools here. Yeah.
Yeah, we love state schools. And so it really is a benefit for those who are in state, and California is an awfully big state. But it has almost been a 2-year BFA concentration in the
Uh-huh.
past. And one of the first things I did, even when they were in the hiring phase of looking for somebody, I was like, in order to be competitive,
Yes.
these kids have got to be doing 4 solid years of BFA level training. Otherwise, it's not quite what it's meant to be.
Well,
So that was step one. And that's what we've been working really hard to do.
take me right into that meeting. So I'd love to be in this meeting. What is your elevator pitch for what Josh is going to do to reform the program, how it's going to be different? So, certainly I'd love to hear a little bit about what it has been, but tell me, like, what do you see, as we're bringing in new classes, what is it going to look like curriculum wise? What are the big goals for what Cal State Fullerton is going to be? I want to hear all of that as if I'm in the boardroom about to hire you to be the head of musical theater.
Yeah. So the bottom line is you need consistent acting, singing, and dance training in every semester for 4 years. So that's across 8 semesters, and that includes everything from private voice to all the different styles of dance that you would need, or movement, because I think one of the traps of musical theater training is that you create these sort of quote unquote triple threat factories
Mm-hmm.
that are just trying to homogenize everybody's skill sets into one ubiquitous sort of musical theater performer, which I think has been toxic to the industry and to academia for decades. And I think we're all getting away from that, but it was a major pitch for me was we want to be versatile in who and how we are training. So
Mm-hmm.
if somebody comes in and they are, the next triple threat performer, we want to have all of the infrastructure to be able to support that performer. But likewise, if someone comes in and they're a phenomenal singer and a phenomenal actor, but dance is just not a language that they speak, we want to be able to support them as well. So it was important to me to spread out that education and buttress it, intensify it, and make sure it's accommodating all 8 semesters, but also make it more flexible so that students have a little more autonomy in choosing how and what they become as professionals.
I
So
love that.
that's the elevator pitch.
Well, and then so what have you done, or what are you doing now to kind of buttress that? So if you're saying, hey, we need to be prepared in all 3 disciplines, here's where we already are strong. What have you done, or what are the plans to do of going, I'm going to bring this person in, or I'm going to do what that's going to sort of help accentuate that training?
Well, the most obvious thing is when I talk about extending to 4 years, that's easier said than done because there's a lot of infrastructure that has to be put in place to make that happen. So one of the things is, and I'll tell you the sort of darker side of this before we get to the lighter side. Not dark in a bad way, but just dark in the sense that it needed improving.
Mm-hmm.
These students were getting 2 years of private voice in
Mm-hmm.
their final junior senior year, and the way it was sort of structured was you did not audition to come into the program,
Mm-hmm.
but instead you came in as a theater BA, and for 2 years, you were on the quote unquote musical theater hopeful track.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of and that could be anywhere between 50 and 100 students who elected to do that. No audition, just come in. And then for 2 years, they would take sort of foundational courses in music theory and a few dance courses and a few acting courses. Um, but they didn't really get musical theater training and they didn't get any private voice. Instead, they had to audition at the end of their
Mhm.
sophomore year, and it was a cut system, as
Yeah.
people know what that phrase means, right? So you cut down however many students it was, 50, 100 or more, down to 12 in that junior year, and the the consequences of that were pretty like a layered onion. Like there's a
Mhm.
lot of things. One of it for me is you're teaching students, hey, for theater, look, you have to take risks. You have to feel free to fail in this creative, safe space.
Mhm.
And you can't tell them that out of one side of your mouth and tell them, but if you don't get it together at a certain point, you're cut from the program.
Mhm.
It's just there's no sort of ethical, sort of safe way to do that. And, students, their identities get wrapped up in the idea of I am a musical theater hopeful
Mhm.
or I'm a musical theater performer. And then if they didn't get it, it's like a rattle to the foundation of who they are. They set up social circles in those courses, and suddenly their social circle is fractured and they may
Mhm.
find themselves in a whole different thing. It that college is hard enough.
Yeah.
Like we don't need to do this to students. And that's all just the sort of ethical academic issues with it. You get, creatively speaking, you're just not going to be as competitive as someone who has a solid 4 year
Yes.
proper BFA degree.
Yeah.
So these are all the reasons why it had to change, and it might help to just know the context of what I came into. So to make that happen, though, we have to hire new voice faculty. We have
Mhm.
to find new spaces in the buildings to house a new vocal studio, so that there's enough people and spaces to accommodate everyone. And that's a lot of maneuvering, but
Mhm.
that has now occurred. We're finalizing who the new voice faculty is later this week, in fact, as fate would have it. So, and these are things we had to wait. This first year that I have been here has been setting all of these plans in
Mhm.
motion, and we're pulling the trigger now so that it's all ready to launch in the fall of 2022, which is a few
Meaning
months away.
this will be your first class of now the 4-year students
That
that
is
are coming
correct.
in.
So we started auditioning for this new track last fall,
Yes.
and so now this is the first new group of students coming in who we are completely committed to. There's no cut system. You come in. If you want to be here, we want you to be here. And now we have a new problem, which is how do we beef up the existing theater BA degree?
Uh-huh.
Because in the past, people came being hopefuls for a
Uh-huh.
BFA education, and then they kind of just found themselves stuck in this BA. So it was always sort of the ugly stepchild, and
Mhm.
which it shouldn't be. And so we've made a lot of strides to change that, and we can talk about that if you like. I don't know if your listeners are all sort of strictly BFA or if
No,
there are
of
theater
course
BA.
not. No, we like the whole spectrum of theater
Oh,
hopefuls.
well,
But
good.
I do love it's I think this is the first program like this that we've talked about, or program at least that had existed, though certainly not the only program that has those. I call them like a reverse cut. It's like this
Mm,
like unlike often schools used to take 80 and then cut them down to 40 sort of in the, if they've auditioned to 80, but then as you go they cut. This feels like when you have a late audition, you're all just sitting there waiting before the cut's going to happen. It's this that's really and not uncommon. I do understand the impetus behind it of saying, "Hey, I want to lay this foundation of stuff that's not necessarily just about the artistic work." But boy, that is hard. It's worse, I think,
yeah,
to go through the whole audition process and then be cut. But still, to be spend 2 years at a school if what you want is the BFA, it's really hard to then
yeah,
turn out you didn't get it.
yeah. And I feel like at the end of the day, we have put a lot of pressure on these BFA programs in general, anyway, in distinguishing them from BAs. And the reality is, in the industry, no one cares.
Correct.
No one
Right.
cares. No one's looking at you in an audition room and they're like, "Wow, this girl's really amazing." And then they look at your resume and they go, "Oh, but she got a
Mm.
BA, not a BFA. I don't think we want that." Nobody does that. That doesn't
Yep.
exist. So, and that's why Cal State's a great example of this. We have a lot of alumni from the BA that have gone on to great
Totally.
industry performance success in theater and television and whatever. And likewise, we have a lot from the BFA over the years. But the fact that they are ubiquitous when it comes to the industry, it's good to know that. I think we as educators have to adapt to that knowledge a little bit.
We say it all the time. My partner has a BS from Indiana. She took voice class, but she's a Tony nominee. It's like, if you're good, you're good. It's like,
If you're
no
good,
one
you're
sits there
good.
and goes, wait a second, what was your degree? What are the letters on that thing say? No one knows.
Yeah, there are industries where it matters, and this is just not one of them. What matters is the training and making sure you're getting a solid foundation under your feet, but it's not about the letters on your degree. Yeah.
Well, what a segue now as we talk about solid foundation. So, as you've pictured, and I totally understand if you don't have all 4 years fully exactly mapped out as they will be, but as you've pictured sort of what the curriculum for these new freshmen who are coming in, what's freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, senior year, what does it feel like you're taking us through as we're laying that foundation and then sending them off into the world?
Yeah, so we do know pretty much what that roadmap looks like. And it starts with, in terms of musical theater, there are core classes that we share with all of the other BFAs. Cal State offers a BFA in acting, a BFA in devised theater and physical performance, and then the musical theater BFA. They all share a common core, which includes like all of the major acting classes, which start right away in freshman year. Introduction to acting, and then sort of the secondary part of that in the spring. There are theater history courses. Musical theater will actually begin. Musical theater BFAs will begin with musical theater history, so that when they get into the sophomore year and they're actually starting to look at genres and styles of singing, they've already kind of walked through the history of it in the
Hmm.
freshman year. They'll take world theater history as it goes, so those will continue to add on. There's, I think, in the sophomore year they'll take European theater history. In the junior year they take, I think, Asian African MENA theater history. And then in the senior year, they have Theater of the Americas, which is North and South America through
Hmm.
time. So it's a pretty comprehensive global sort of theater history thing, which I'm really excited about, because not all musical theater programs honor that history, and some just look at musical theater and then that's
Hmm.
all you need to know. And so we try to be a little more well-rounded there. Going back to the freshman year, they start with introductory voice and speech classes, and sort of movement for the actor. That stuff is laid in a Music 101, sort of the introductory music theory course in the spring that turns into sort of a sight singing course, and light ensemble singing. In the second year, I think I already kind of mentioned this. They go into learning about the genres of sort of historic musical theater and different styles of vocal performance, all sort of complemented by the work you're doing in your private voice studio, which in the freshman year is probably going to be more exercise based and foundational, just getting the systems in place of
Hmm.
making sure these muscles know what they're doing. You'll sing a little bit of rep, but it's not focused on rep until you start getting into the second, third, and then fourth year is basically all rep. It kind of scaffolds that way. And this is all by design. I mean, this is why we're stretching it into a 4-year program, to
Hmm.
make sure. Previously you kind of had to dive straight into rep because you didn't have time at that stage in your college career. So now we can take the time to make sure that foundation is strong before we just dive into, let's build an audition book, you know.
Hmm.
But that comes with time. By the time you get to senior year, you are taking directing classes. You're taking, this is new. Again, we're 25 miles outside of Los Angeles, so one of my big goals is, especially because we're so close to LA, I don't think you can have any theater program that does not include some on-camera acting training. And
Hmm.
and frankly, I think that's a universal truth for all theater programs, whether you're musical theater, devised, act, whatever you're doing.
Hmm.
And I'm a good example of it. You kind of highlighted some of my resume to begin with. I've spent most of my career, time-wise, doing musical theater, but at least 50% of my career financially, and probably more now that Mrs. Maisel has happened.
Hmm.
um, at least 50% of my career financially has been in film and television. And so I I really think, to be a surviving artist these days in this field, you need to have, sort of your iron in as many fires as possible. And so we want to make sure that we're training students to be comfortable in front of a camera and to know some of the do's and don'ts in that arena. So that is a required course going forward. It's in the later part of the training. Then there's also sort of the practicum classes. In junior year, you're doing scene into song classes,
Mm-hmm.
as well as scene work in straight acting classes. That in the senior year sort of becomes building the showcase, which we still do. It's we've kind of lightened it and turned it into more of a concert that happens at a major venue in the city in New York, like 54 Below is where we did it
Mm-hmm.
last year, which is just a nice branded, arena that everybody in the industry is very familiar with and feels confident going to. And it simplifies it. We're not doing group numbers and all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We're focusing on creating demo materials that exist in perpetuity online and on students' websites and in their however they want to present themselves in their online portfolios. But we're building all of that because the industry is sort of demanding,
Mm-hmm.
look, let me just sit in my office and look at what you do. I
Yep.
don't want to go to the showcase anymore. But we're making the showcase sort of a fun event that's kind of enjoyable, whether you are looking at it strictly from an industry perspective or not. Because unlike the traditional thing, you can go to 54 Below, you can have a drink, you can enjoy the show.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as it is a showcase, it's also a simple celebration of a 4-year journey that these students have made and this bridge that we want to build for them into New York. That senior year is also filled with a lot of workshops and guest artists who are Broadway performers or people in LA who are agents or casting directors. We then go to, when we're in New York for the showcase, we're doing a bunch of industry workshops there, also just to get people familiar with these students and give them access to them,
Mm-hmm.
which is great. We had about a 70% response rate from agencies to our students last year when we switched to this new system.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a huge increase from what it was before we got here. So we feel like we're on the right track. And we've gotten a lot of industry feedback from this new template that they are really excited about what we're doing and that this feels right to them. So this is sort of that's a big, long-winded bird's eye view of a 4-year crash course.
What about I'd love to say you mentioned some of each of the disciplines, so I think we could talk a little bit more about acting specifically for musical theater majors. But is there one of the disciplines that you feel like you're spending more credit hours on in general? I know you said it's a little bit fungible per student, but is there one of leg of the stool that gets a little bit more weight on it?
That's such a great question because for me, idealistically ideologically speaking, I feel acting is the center of all theater. Like you can be a phenomenal singer, but if you can't act, it's
Hmm.
not really of huge value to us in the industry. There is places where it can exist, but it's not comfortable and it's not what we are hoping for. Same with dance. I think a lot of people have an old school sort of view of becoming a dancer on Broadway and what that means. And they think, well, I'm not really the greatest singer and I really don't like acting at all. I don't like learning lines, but I love dance and dance is my whole thing. So I'm just going to be a dancer on Broadway. But the reality is, especially now that COVID has happened and we're in a new world of
Hmm.
coverage. And if you don't know what that word means, just everybody in the ensemble, almost
Hmm.
80% of them have to cover some other part, which are typically principals. So not only must you dance well enough to be in the ensemble of a Broadway show, you also must sing and act well enough to carry that Broadway show as a
Hmm.
principal in the event that the principal goes down, which we know they now will. And we as an industry are asking producers to shift more and more towards understudies and swings and coverage. So that means that the demands of ensemble performers are just increasing yearly. So because of all of that, I say even if you enter the industry saying I just want to dance, that's my big thing.
Hmm.
You must carry a scene, like you must be an actor, and so for me as the head of the program, I advocate for that. That said, in terms of just raw numbers of unit counts and how much is distributed, it is really evenly split
Hmm.
across the three. Um, if you included academic classes like theater history, if you lumped all that in towards the acting arena, because that doesn't really feel like singing or dancing, I guess acting would take more precedence. But in
Hmm.
terms of raw performance classes, it's pretty consistently spread across all three.
Great. And then what about for acting majors? How does, and you mentioned that there's some classes that are shared between all the majors. How does it work in terms of interaction with, let's say I'm an acting major who is interested in musical theater. Maybe I'm a good singer, but I don't know if I want to be a dancer. So I'm taking the acting major. Can I take voice lessons? Can I audition for musicals? Do I take classes with the MTs? Are they more separate? How does it work in terms of those programs?
So they are. They are pretty separate in terms of classes. You're rarely, it does happen, in the fall of this year, we will likely combine the first year acting students with the first year musical theater students in terms of their initial acting classes.
Hmm.
That's not typical for us, but we have smaller classes this year, so we think we can do it, and we actually, I celebrate it. I think it's great to see different people's instincts and all the different energies that come with different performers, and different. It inspires people in different ways.
Hmm.
And people with different priorities. Straight actors tend to have just sort of a different viewpoint than a lot of musical theater actors, and so being able to work together, I think, is great. So it does happen, but it's not typical. Usually, those classes are all separate. So. The acting majors are all together in their voice and movement class, and the musical theater students are all together. And a lot of
Hmm.
that is logistics because they have different tracks of classes, and they have to be put on the schedule in some way that they can take them all without conflicting. So they're, so it's often segregated like that. But in terms of production, uh, you can audition and be cast across the board. So this, again, I'll use this coming fall as an example. We cast the fall musical, which is Merrily We Roll Along, in the spring of last semester. So we know the cast already, and the lead of the one of the three leads of that show is actually an acting major,
Hmm.
even though it's a musical. Granted, Merrily is an actor centric musical, so it's not that they didn't need to have a bunch of dance training in order to play
Hmm.
that role. So it did lend itself to that, but we wanted to make it accessible in that way, and that was a change. That was not, it was technically available in the past, but we actually really threw the curtains wide open on this and said, you tell us as students, what are your creative priorities and how can we
Hmm.
best serve that? So if you put, I want to be, I want to be seen for the musical first. Like, that's my priority if I got to choose. You might audition for everything, and we encourage you to. But if different productions are vying for the same student, we'll look at that audition sheet and say, oh, well, she actually asked to prioritize the musical. So if the musical's interested, she's going to go there,
Hmm.
rather than us as faculty sort of laying claim to students, being this one's mine and that one's yours, and we just didn't want that. That's a shift, a cultural sort of shift on campus, and we're thrilled about it because it allows us to have more flexibility for the student.
Well, the same way we talked about, do we care if it's a BFA, a BA, or a BS? Nobody's ever going to ask, oh, but you were an acting major there? I mean, people just assume. I run a musical theater company. I went to Carnegie Mellon. People assume I'm a Carnegie Mellon and musical theater major. I was an acting major, but nobody knows, right? If you can sing, who cares, right? That
Yeah, and I just did a musical workshop of a new show in New York earlier this year, and one of the other lead characters of this thing was it was the exact same thing. He went to Carnegie, and I just naturally assumed he was a musical theater major because he was doing a musical, and he was like, "Oh, no, I was an acting major," and it blew my mind because he was a phenomenal vocalist.
hmm
And it's like, so this is exactly the point, is people have these amazing skill sets, but if you pigeonhole them in college, what service are you doing to them
hmm
to really explore the full breadth of what they could do?
Speaking of full breath, what about with dance classes? So, how does it work in terms of, do I stay in my freshman, sophomore, junior dance class? Am I leveled across the different years? How does that work for you guys?
Yeah, you're leveled based on your skill set. So if you come in, you're naturally put into, level one of everything. So ballet one, jazz one, tap one, modern one, whatever it is that you're taking. If you get in there and in that first week you're a phenomenal, you know, uh, ballet dancer, then
Hmm.
the instructor is going to recommend that you bump up to the next level or wherever it is that you think you should be. There are technically, I think, four levels of ballet, but by the time you get to the fourth level, you're actually not taking class with theater students at all. You're taking class with the dance majors.
Hmm.
So it becomes a different thing over time, which can be tricky for scheduling reasons because those classes are not expected for theater students to take, but anything is possible. It just gets a little more complicated, and that's where you might see, well, this student's an amazing dancer, she needs to be taking ballet 3, but that means that conflicts with her
Hmm.
acting 2, so she would need to take acting 2 with the devised theater majors instead
Uh-huh.
of the musical theater and then we have to get creative on how we sort out the scheduling, but we want to do it as much as we possibly can because, again, this is how you serve the student need the best.
I love it. Let's talk about one of our favorite C words, cost. In terms of, so how does it work with, if I'm a California State, I live in California State, I get in-state tuition. Do we know if there's any way of, like, some of these schools, they can offer out-of-state tuition sometimes, or if you live there for 6 months, you can apply for residency. Do we know how that's worked, or have we figured any workarounds? If I'm a student from New York and I'm interested in Cal State, and I say, oh, can I get that in-state tuition? How that might work?
Yeah, this is one thing where I'll just be totally. I tend to be overly transparent, so forgive me and cut me off when I should stop speaking. But this is one area where the school has basically said, when you're asked about this, do not answer it. And
Great.
and part there's probably a lot of logistical and probably legal
Hmm.
issues that I'm stepping into with this question. So I will avoid answering it with the full transparency of why I'm not supposed to talk about it. But I know it's longer than 6 months from what I've heard from students, but I have also heard that it has happened, and so I'll just say, if you're interested in that path, that's something you should research.
You should talk to anyone except Josh about that, is what you're
Anybody
saying.
except faculty of the school who are employed by the state. But I will say this: cost wise, I'm going to say something radical and
Yes,
provocative right now. Don't
this is what I
don't.
want. This is what I want.
I
Yes.
know this is where the money. This is the headline that you can put
Hmm.
on the episode
I'm
and say
aggregating this as we speak. I'm
he said it.
pre-aggregating.
He said it.
Hmm.
Um, I truly believe there is no college degree that is worth over $100,000. I
Bing,
s-
bing, 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 bing,
I
bing, bing,
said
bing.
it.
Type, 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 type.
I said what I said. I'll say it again. I don't believe there's any college degree that is worth over $100,000, and I can say that confidently because I'm at a school that is a state school, and it's a good state that really celebrates education. And if you are in state, you will spend less than $30,000 for all 4 years
Hmm.
of your training. The average, I think, debt ratio for students graduating from the entire CSUF campus, which is the largest campus in the CSU system, is, I think, 24,000, which means they basically have put all of the education into loans, and that is
Hmm.
the extent of it.
Hmm.
That is the cost of one semester at many schools.
Oh
Um,
my gosh.
it,
Under some schools.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so that to me, and I'll be very honest, I went to the Boston Conservatory, got a BFA in musical theater from there. I had a great experience. I loved the school. But I came out with well over $100,000 of debt.
Hmm.
And the only reason I paid it off was again because of television. I
Hmm.
mean, that's theater. It's going to be very hard to pay that off, even when you're doing Broadway contracts, even when you're doing national tours. You will spend all of it to pay that off, and most people will never get to that financial place anyway. So to me, there is an ethical problem in the industry of training as a whole, and this is an area that I'm very passionate about. I So as much as I celebrate people from New York looking like, oh, I always love to train on the West Coast, that sounds really cool, I'd love to do that. um, we can't, not only can we not really compete in terms of scholarship money for that because our school is not set up to do that. um, uh, I don't recommend that students do it unless they don't have a state program that
Hmm.
they can embrace near them. I mean,
Hmm.
I in an ideal world, every state would have a really strong BFA program that suits the needs of the people who live there, and it would be cost effective, and we would not be straddling an entire generation of
Hmm.
humans with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt before they even get to the workplace, which, if you want to talk about those statistics, the workplace in our case is very dark. I mean, it's a
Hmm.
very difficult career path. So the more leg up you have in terms of, well, how much am I spending monthly on my loan payments? I think that is that could be the difference between the longevity of your career in those early days and not being able to sustain it because you have to pay off all this debt.
Yep. It's such a beautiful point. I mean, that's our first episode with Telly Leung, who was 20 years into his career, just finally paying off his, Carnegie Mellon loans. And again, this is with many Broadway shows, a lot. I mean, that's a very successful career. To be
Very.
20 years in paying yourself off is,
Yeah.
it's daunting, when you talk
It's
about those big
it's
costs.
it's daunting. So I really celebrate it. I can tell you for this year, it's, I think, $28,000 for all 4 years. That's a little less than $4,000 per semester. The cool thing about our school too is that it's a buffet style education, which means you can take as many classes for that $4,000 or less,
Mm-hmm.
$3,500 a semester, you can take as many classes as you think you can handle in a semester.
Hmm.
Unlike a private school model, which generally you're paying a certain
Right.
amount
Per
per
credit.
class that you put on your schedule. So that's that's a pretty stark difference in terms of financial
And if I
ability.
am listening to this in Montana and I'm going, oh my God, this place seems so great. What would that difference chunk out to then? Now, if I'm not going to get the in-state tuition because there's no workaround, what would that look like?
Yeah, so if you just came raw out of state tuition, you're looking at roughly 76,000 based on this year's numbers, which for an out of state cost, that is still lower than
Yeah.
almost any other
Because
program
just to be clear, you're saying 76,000 for the 4 years.
for the 4 years. Yeah,
Right.
for all
Right.
4 years. So
Which
so
again, some of these
76,000
programs,
is
that's 1 year, just to be clear. Just for
I
some.
know, and that's why I say I really celebrate the Californian students who are able to get that in-state tuition, but
Hmm.
even the out-of-state tuition, in context of the rest of the country, is still sadly really competitive at
Hmm.
76,000.
I love it. Is there like one other thing that you go, nobody knows this about our school, whether it's, kind of a best kept secret, or if there's something that you feel like, I really wish people knew this beforehand, before they decided not to audition for my school, or they did audition, but before they decided not to go. Like, what's the kind of stuff that people discover, freshman year and they go, oh my God, I didn't even know.
I mean, outside of the cost, I think the cost is the one that when people are running numbers, they're shocked by.
Hmm.
Um, uh, Outside of that, I would say the new thing that I think people are experiencing is, oh my God, and this is going to sound sad and really crazy, but I think they go, oh my God, these faculty really care.
Hmm.
They care about what happens to me. They care about me as a human being, not just as a number. Um, they they want me to become an artist. They want me to become the artist that I want to become. They're not trying to force me to be one thing or other. I think that is a radical departure from a lot of theater training, sadly, historically. I also think it's a little bit of a departure from what was historically done here on this campus
Hmm.
in the years past, for a lot of different reasons. And it's not blaming anybody or pointing fingers. It's just the world has changed, the industry has changed,
Hmm.
academia has changed, and I think the benefit of having new people come in with fresh ideas at this moment in time, after these massive cultural movements have
Hmm.
occurred over the last few years, the benefit of that is we get to ride those waves with fresh with fresh ideas and fresh eyes. So that, I think that there's a cultural shift happening just in the department because of all these new faculty that have come in, and I'm one of many,
Yep.
not just in musical theater, but in theater education and in set design and lighting design and all these, and theater history. Like, there's a lot of new folks in here over the last few years, and it's a really exciting time for this particular campus because of that. And I'd say that is something that people will really notice and respond to in the first few steps onto the campus.
I love it. And then what about, we didn't really talk about outside of the theater program. What am I getting from the broader university? Whether these are any classes that are not in the theater program, or just also facilities and other things about the broad university.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's a major state school. So it's Cal State University system. Fullerton is the largest campus. It has a little over 42,000 students. So this is a big old, if you're looking for
Hmm.
that quintessential college experience, which is, it's a conservatory style training within that model. But the reality is we have giant sporting arenas. We have
Hmm.
nationally recognized sports teams. We have these great student unions and recreation centers with rock climbing walls and pools and personal trainers and all this stuff. There's like a
I get a
bowling
personal
alley in the
trainer if
movie.
I go there. I get to.
You can.
That seems
They're
pretty great.
there. Yeah, I mean, it's all of those little perks. We have an arboretum, which is this 26-acre nature reserve that's on site. It's stuff like that. That's like
Hmm.
that's pretty special and pretty
Yeah.
cool. And you forget some. We get so bogged down with like, oh, but can I hit that high A today? Like, we get so micro in our view that we sometimes forget that no, we've got all of this right at our doorstep. And speaking of which, yes, we're 25 miles outside of Los Angeles and all of what that has to offer. There are regional theaters all around us
Hmm.
producing musical work. There's Musical Theater West in Long Beach. There is 3D Theatricals, which is right in Cerritos, outside of our right outside of our campus. La Mirada Theater, which is Tom McCoy and Kathy Rigby's company, producing shows there. Just north there's Pasadena Playhouse. Just south you get to La Jolla and the Globe and all of those theaters. There's I think 300 small theaters in Los Angeles alone. We're 15 minutes outside of Disneyland and other theme parks. There's Universal and Knott's and all these other little, which weirdly give a lot of our students employment either during the year or
Totally.
during the summers. We have a lot of students who are employed as theme park performers to kind of carry themselves through college. And we're one of the few schools that Disney has blessed in the way that they allow us to do merch with them. So you can go into our campus gift shop and you actually find the Disney merch somehow, partly because we're in their backyard. So, but all that stuff, it just adds to the idea. I mean, yes, Southern California, you're 30 minutes to the beach, you're 2 hours from the desert or the mountains, and then another 45 minutes to downtown Los Angeles. With all of those options, there's just so much here. In Fullerton itself, it's something like, I love this statistic, it's something like average of 80 degrees in the summer and 70 degrees in the winter. It's sort of like if you've lived anywhere else in the country, you start looking at those numbers and you go, man, that sounds like a good life.
Sounds pretty good if I'm coming from some, Michigan or whatever. All right, my last question in this, and then we'll take a break and talk about auditions a bit, is just why would a student not choose your school? So especially maybe let's say in the last year, so you've done one full cycle and now you may accept some students who said, thank you so much, but I'm going somewhere else. Why do you feel like they ended up going in a different direction?
I think one is that we have an idea about brand recognition, and we look at 5 top musical theater schools, and then we look at another 5 or 10 below that are sort of the B tier. And then people don't know, especially on a national stage, people don't know that Cal State exists yet. Part of my job, part of the reason why I'm on this podcast right now, is we need to become known. People need to know that we're here and what we are doing and why it's relevant, and why it's so beneficial to the sort of the future of not only individual students, but also I think we have the potential to really become a beacon of what a program can look like. And I think things like affordability and accessibility and what kind of a bridge we are building to the industry and how that serves students, these are all major factors in how this is done. So why students might not go, though, I think if you have not done a ton of research, because you have to really put in some legwork to figure out what all the program options for you are. And if you're only thinking, well, I know of University of Michigan, I know Carnegie Mellon, and does Juilliard have a musical theater program? These
You're
are like
sounding like you're about to do initial consult with us. I'm like, let's talk about it.
You're used to that, right? So if you never quite get out of that mindset, you may never even find us because you weren't looking. And I think historically, there have not been any strong 4-year BFA musical theater programs on the entirety of the West Coast. So many students, even when I was in Boston, about a third of my classmates were all from California.
Yep.
And it's because they thought in order to get good training, they had to go to the East Coast. And it's just not true anymore. And I'm the living sort of proof of that. But for all those students who don't know that is changing yet, those are all reasons why it's not that they didn't, that they passed on coming. They may never have even auditioned because it wasn't on their map yet.
It's so true. And I will say, I'm sure you know this, but to our students out there too, it's just like how quickly that map changes. We call it mapping the college auditions because the map is so ever shifting. I mean, you hear about schools like Texas State and Baldwin Wallace, which they've had on their lists now for 8 years. But when we started doing this was on nobody's list.
Correct.
Nobody had heard of these programs. And then, a program head they believed in put something together and a couple good classes, and all of a sudden it's where everyone wants to go. So it really can shift and change. I often make the stock analogy. It's like some of these stocks shoot up and shoot down and move around. It can change pretty quickly.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Let's take a short break and then we'll talk about the audition process very soon.
I can't wait.
All right, we are back with Josh Grisetti, and we're going to talk a bit about his one and only audition process for Cal State Fullerton. I'm so excited. So in this process of looking at students, I just love to hear about like what do you feel like made a really great audition for you? When you saw someone, you said, "I want that person. Come on, you're going to join our campus." What do they do? What was their audition like? What made you sort of say it's a yes for me?
Um, First, let me tell you what it's not. It's not who sings the loudest or the highest. It's not who is the best showman. um, uh, and it's not people. I feel like a lot of times young actors are not actually rooted in anything other than an idea of what they wish they were. So they play almost a caricature of themselves being an actor. They're
Mm-hmm.
acting the part of being an actor
Mm-hmm.
rather than just actually inhabiting a character in some way or bringing
Mm-hmm.
life to a piece of text or bringing life to a song that is authentic to them. So, how do you do that? How do you bring authenticity? And I guess that's the answer. If I had to put a word on it, what lights me up the most is authentic. When
Mm-hmm.
someone comes in and I'm like, this person is uniquely themselves and unapologetically themselves. That kind of confidence is so rare at a young age that when it appears, it just is so thrilling. And it's an actor who trusts that they actually have a voice that is worth speaking into
Mm-hmm.
the universe, and that it commands my attention. Because when a young, especially a young person, because we're not predicting it, young people tend to be a little sheepish and a little shy, and they tend to
Mm-hmm.
hide from themselves. And so that's why I say they tend to be playing caricatures more than they
Mm-hmm.
play authentic things. They like to hide behind a mask, and so what that mask becomes is sort of up to them. But the goal is to get them to drop that mask and to actually show us a little piece of themselves, a piece of their heart, a piece of their mind, a piece of their spirit. Like, what is it that makes you tick? And it doesn't have to be what I'm expecting. I don't even know that I want to hear your voice yet, but when you
Mm-hmm.
come in and are authentic with with how you're presenting yourself, I immediately am enamored. So I'd say that is the thing that I focus on the most. How you get there is so tricky, because if I had a pill.
I was just gonna say, if you can tell us how to do that in this pod right now, if you can tell them how to be confident in their authentic self, that will beat the aggregation on the
yeah,
cost. I'll delete that and
yeah,
put this in there
yeah.
instead.
No, it's so easier said than done. But I think that's why I opened with what it is not, because I think we get so hung up on, oh, if I could just hit that G really
Uh-huh.
cleanly, then they'd put me in the program and
Uh-huh.
then they'd cast me in the thing. It's like, yeah, but that's not necessarily true. And I think our
Mhm.
focus is on the wrong thing. You do need, in certain environments, you do need to focus on that. That's what's so hard for young people to identify, is that when you're in a voice lesson, yes, your focus needs to
Mhm.
be on these technical little nuts and bolts. But when you're in performance, that is a different mindset. It's a different
Mhm.
modality than when you're in the vocal studio. Same in the dance class and whatever. When you're
Mhm.
performing, all of that training must go onto the back burner, and you have to trust that it is now in the DNA of your performance, and you need to focus on what is actually happening in the space, in the moment. What is this that the moment that you're living in? Like, embody that and stop worrying about the technical nuts and bolts. But it's tricky because in classes, that's all they've been focused on, is the
For
technical
sure.
nuts and bolts. So they think I just keep focusing on those and that's performing. And it's not. They're two different things.
Well, and you talked about, them removing their metaphorical masks, right? But of course, now for the past 2 years, students have been often rehearsing with literal masks on their
Oh,
faces, right? So it's like as if it's not hard enough to reveal yourself. Here I am, and half of me is covered from you, and a pretty important half of me is covered. So I mean, I've just worked at the Performing Arts Project for 2 weeks, teaching students, and we had a little COVID scare, and so then everyone was putting their masks on, and trying to teach acting with masks on is unbelievable. I mean, I know a lot of schools have done it, but it's just in terms of trying to be like, no, vulnerability, reveal yourself, and they're like, what? And all I can see is like a little bit of their eyes.
yeah. Well,
It's
and
it's
the
tough.
jaw tension that has come from
Ugh.
students trying to not sing with wide open enough mouths so that this mask stays on their nose, but that creates so much jaw tension. It's like, no, you need to open your mouth, you need to let it, let that sound out. So we're having to do sort of some triage and post COVID mask wearing
Hmm.
land. Yeah, but it's absolutely a real problem.
I mean, you mentioned, so okay, we don't just want to come in singing loud. Are there any other kind of like red flags that when you see it in a student's audition, you go, this might not be the right student for us, or I really this put me in a bad place, or it was a turn off for me.
There's nothing, this is one of my favorite things. There are no absolute truths. And anybody who says that there are, what they really mean is there are trends and there are things that most likely will not work, but they sometimes do.
Hmm.
That's the tricky thing. So for all of this, there are certain things that put certain people off. So
Mhm.
the student who comes in using a million curse words, and it seems like that's all that they're doing is trying to shock us. Like,
Mhm.
some people are really put off by that. Generally, it doesn't really do anything for me. I'm neutral to that, but I can see it as a risk that you may not want to take with all faculty at all schools.
Mhm.
Um, there are certain types of songs that are like things that are highly sexualized in content, even in musical. I mean, there's musical numbers that are all like a certain idea. Some of that is
Mhm.
like just off-putting because we're watching somebody. You have to remember, especially as a high school student auditioning for a college program, we have a concept of who you are
Mhm.
in sort of age and whatever, and so some of that feels like, it just feels icky. It's like, I don't really want to see that from somebody who's 17 or
Mhm.
18. You know what I mean? And it's hard because it's like, yes, but theater needs to have no bounds, and we need to be able to tell all stories. And yes, that's true. But just knowing that it's like meeting somebody for the first time. You don't necessarily want that to be the foot you lead with. It's just stuff like that. Is
Yeah.
is is this the best representation of you? Is this like the thing that you feel like you are the most connected to? And again, no absolute truth. If that really is, if one of those pocket, like, I am raging against the world, and the
Mhm.
only thing that gives me true voice right now is a string of obscenities screamed into the night,
Mhm.
and that's the monologue you do. If you're that connected to it, I won't care what
Mhm.
the content of it was, because it's the connection that's so intriguing. But if you're not that connected, and to be honest, I think a lot of people are simply not that connected to the monologues that they choose.
Yep.
So don't force yourself to do something
Yeah.
because it's bold or provocative or it just doesn't work,
Yeah. Well,
because it doesn't feel authentic.
and as we always say, it's like if you are that student that you just described and you need to do that curse word laden monologue because it's so deep in you that you have to do it, then anyone who's going to be turned off by it probably is not the right school for you. That, like,
Correct.
you'll have done your job then to go, if you're like, but that's me, that's Charlie. He cusses like a sailor. That's all. I cannot help it. That's If that's true, then I'm like, well, then I'm probably not right for a school that's going to be turned off
Yeah,
by it.
because these are all relationships at the end of the day. And just as you would meet a new friend and realize, oh, we do not share the same vernacular, we don't
Mm-hmm.
share the same aesthetic, this might not be the best relationship to embark on together.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with faculty and students. I think that there is such that you need to have that thing that resonates. You need to feel respected, you need to feel seen, and valued. And if you feel like you're constantly swimming upstream in any of those arenas with the
Yeah.
faculty you're working with, you're never going to be able to really explore the depths of yourself as an artist. You're going to be trying to fit into somebody else's box. It's not going to be
Mm-hmm.
good.
Can you think of a specific audition in this last year that was exemplary? And you don't have to tell us the student's name, God forbid, but specific audition that was exemplary, and what makes it stand out for you. So if there's something that you go, I remember an audition from this year, maybe from a student that we accepted, or some student that at least we were interested in, that you go, oh God, it really stands out because X.
I mean, I would say there were several that I still remember, and some of them we have coming, which is really exciting, and some of them got away, and it
Mm-hmm.
breaks my heart because you get so excited about certain students, and you're like, no,
Mm-hmm.
please don't go anywhere else, stay here. But it's weird. The thing that they all have in common, I'll be honest, is most of them had stellar vocal performances,
Mm-hmm.
and but not just because they hit notes. That's only a fraction of it. Some of it is people who were wobbly on certain sounds, but you heard the raw ability that was in there. It's like, well, yes, you need voice lessons, but if you didn't need voice lessons, you wouldn't need to come here anyway.
Mm-hmm.
You'd be ready to just dive straight into the business.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, you're already on your way to figuring out your vocals, which is very exciting for us to be a part of. But you're also telling a story. You're embodying a character through this song. That is the stuff that is really compelling. Idiosyncratic behavior, stuff that's what makes things feel believable and
Mm-hmm.
realistic to us, I think. Um, and students rarely tap into that
Mm-hmm.
because they're trying to curate everything
Mm-hmm.
for the sake of the story, for the sake of the character. And when you curate every single moment, it all starts to feel false because nothing is that curated in real life.
Totally.
And so when people really embody stuff, it's stuff that it seems like they're surprising themselves while they're performing, like something came out of them that they weren't even expecting. And that's the stuff that lights me up, because I'm like, that person is living in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's exciting. I want to see what else they do.
So true. What about, so for the dreaded pre-screens of it all? So you guys are taking the common pre-screen. Is it optional for you, or is it required to do the common pre-screen in order to get a callback?
Um, Essentially, yeah, you have to do the common pre-screen. We joined up with that Paper Mill Playhouse common pre-screen thing because we wanted to make it as accessible and universal as possible, so that you're not having to juggle a million different sets
Hmm.
of requirements at once. But because of that, we stick pretty closely to what it is. There are optional elements to it. For us, dance is an optional video. You don't have to send us a dance reel, but if you do dance, we want to know about it because it's sort of like value added. We understand that some people are just not dancers. That's not their gift right now. And that said, some people will become them in 4 years, but they don't know it yet,
Hmm.
and we don't want to rule any of them out. But likewise, if we have someone who that's the thing that they lead with, we want to
Totally.
know that too. And so people are sort of, uh, the evaluation is pretty um, empathetic to everybody's different skill sets. But because of that, you must be able to sing and act. Like we must that I don't know that there's any version of a career in musical theater where those two things are not
Hmm.
present. Um, but dancing is a little bit more flexible for us. That's not for every musical theater program, but for us it is. And we've even changed the rules curriculum wise, where if you go through the first 2 years of the program where you're doing, your basic ballet, tap, jazz combos, and you get to the end of that and you're like, this is not my thing. Like
Hmm.
and it's not the artist I want to become in musical theater. You can swap those out in the last 2 years for other sort of somatic work, like body work, stuff that brings awareness to your body, because you need
Hmm.
to have that. So that could be a devised theater course. It could be a movement for the actor course. It could be yoga for the performer.
Hmm.
There's a hip hop class. There are kinesiology is a whole department on campus, and they offer some body work stuff
I
that,
got to get that personal trainer for sure, at the
and
very
then you get
least.
your personal
Come on.
trainer, and you're off and running. So whatever it is that you connect with the most, you have to do stuff that is movement based, but it doesn't necessarily have to be dance based. So
Uh-huh.
we take that into account even in the audition process, right? Likewise, there's a wild card video that you can show. You don't have to; it's optional. But the required stuff are you have to do one monologue
And
and
the
two
songs
songs.
are for you.
Yeah.
And then what about, so if you're really helpful to know sort of, okay, so the acting, singing are weighed more heavily. It seems like the dance can be more of a positive, but not necessarily going to be, I'm going to exclude you if dance is not a skill set in the audition. But
Yep.
in those main auditions, live auditions, whether they're Zoom or in person, how much for you is sort of the skill that you're seeing? If you were to give us a score of a 9 out of 10 as a singer, an 8 an actor, and a 2 dancer or whatever, right? How much is that weighed versus like the intangibles of the interview, or if you give an adjustment and how they deal with it and what they're like in the room? How much does it weigh on each side of that for you?
I would say honestly, I suspect that the intangible stuff is going to weigh more heavily in the callback phase
Hmm.
than it will in the initial phase, the pre-screen. But not only because we're going to get a better sense of your personality and who you are in the room in that callback, because the callback will be live, whether it's
Totally.
a virtual or on campus. Like we get to see you reacting in real time, and we can give notes and see how you incorporate them or not. Those things will become much more effective in the callback. In the pre-screen, there's room for it because basically the way that our scoring works is similar to what you just said. Is like, okay, this is an 8.5 for acting and a 7.5 for singing, and kind of a 3.6 for for
We're going
dance.
to the point ones. My God,
Yeah,
great
I don't
load.
know. Whatever it is, every faculty can decide for themselves how they want to break it down. But but in that sort of value added section, you can put any number you want in there between 1 and whatever 5 or 10, and that could be because of because purely because of personality,
Hmm.
purely because there's some light in this person that I can't put my finger on, but I'm just drawn to it.
Hmm.
Um, that you can add that in. It could be a special skill set that we saw in a wild card video. It's like, well, but they're amazing at playing the accordion. Who knew? Like how cool. Or there we also look at like I know diversity and inclusion, all these buzzwords are around all the time, but the reality is it benefits the campus as a whole to have a diverse group of students, and in
Hmm.
every way we can talk about that. So it's not just race, and it's not just gender identity, and all the, but it's all of the things that could spread
Hmm.
out from that, including skill sets, and weirdly personality types. Like, you don't
Totally.
want homogeny, you
Totally.
want different ideas, different presences. And so some people come in with like culturally specific dance.
Hmm.
Somebody like someone from Hawaii comes in and they do this gorgeous, like, a dance that no one else would even think to do, but it's because they
Hmm.
were raised with this and this is part of their tradition and they're bringing that to the campus. That is good for all of us. So you get there's room for all of that in the scoring process
In
for
that
sure.
represents a literal value add where you might add like +3 or whatever. Like,
Yes.
so it brings you up to an 8 if you were at
Yeah,
a 5 or whatever.
and weirdly, that changes. So, like, what is probably not gonna change just from statistics are there's a lot more women who want to go into theater, people who
Hmm.
identify as women versus people who identify as men, um, and so that balance is always very hard. So in a weird way, men are always gonna get probably a value added bonus
Hmm.
simply for the sake that they're bringing in diversity that we don't otherwise have.
Hmm.
But that said, in the past, like many schools, they wanted to really have an even split of male and female, um, uh, and we have really kind of broken that mold to say, well, no, I think we really want the people who are most ready to receive this training. So if there are no men who are really ready right now in this year in this audition process, then we're not going to force
You'll
people
have a
in
class of
who.
12 women.
Yeah, we will put in a
Love
class of 12 women, because they're the ones who are ready today,
We have
and
some female students out there who are just so happy hearing that. They're like,
well,
"Yes,
and we've heard
finally."
we've heard that frustration from students who identify as women saying, listen, I feel like I have to work twice as hard. It's like, well, in a certain way, that is going to be true all the way through the industry because there is a supply and demand problem that we're all
Mhm,
wrestling with. And now that non-binary is sort of becoming a more common thing, it's like, well, where does that fit into that
mhm,
old binary metric? So we're really reevaluating what all of that means and what it looks
mhm.
like, and we're thrilled to be doing that work. But it is sort of the new frontier, and we're still waiting to see how this really manifests over time. But right now, it means these types of things cannot be the only thing that we
Yeah.
use to filter people in or out.
And I always say the colleges are leading the industry on some of this stuff. I mean, that really is a
They really
we're
are.
graduating students that are then going to create the industry that they want to see. I mean, it's just been happening already, but I think it will continue to happen over the next decade. It's just more and
Yeah.
more students have come out and demand an industry that is sort of exists, is starting to exist, is that, but that they're really going to shape.
Yep. And so even that in the vocal studio, it's a new frontier, but it's like finding voice teachers who have experience teaching
Hmm.
non-binary or trans voices. Like,
Yep.
that is currently a special skill. That's not something everybody is trained with or equipped to do. And even having rep prepared for students who fall into that bracket, that's a new thing that it has to be identified. But making sure
Hmm.
you have people in leadership positions who are advocating for that and saying these are priorities and we need to make sure that we're ready for this, for both the students who are already here, but also we know these numbers are going to grow in the future, and are we ready to embrace that?
And then for your school, in terms of the academics, so let's say you love me artistically, I get lots of bonuses for being my personality. I'm so great, right? But then, how does that work in terms of if you like me? Am I just in? Does the school have a say? Is there a percentage in terms of that? Do you have to run it by them? How does it work in terms of now actually getting admitted to the school, and then maybe even things like academic scholarships?
Yeah, so it's a great question. It's pretty regimented, and we have very little control over it. So the reality is, you must apply to the university before we can even look at your audition material. Because if you miss that November 30th deadline of the
Hmm.
university application, there's nothing we can do.
So no walk-ins for you is what you're saying.
No walk, no,
Can't happen.
not in the spring, no.
Hmm.
And that's why we lined up our pre-screen videos. We use the Accepted platform. That's a new thing as of this year. We also made that shift this year. But so we use the Accepted platform, and we made the due dates on the Accepted videos the same date as that November 30th,
Hmm.
for the university application, just so it's in everybody's head. That number is very
Hmm.
important, November 30th, because we are so constricted by if somebody came in May. And this is actually common, and I'll just be very honest about this. I think a lot of students, particularly on the West Coast, look at any program on the West Coast because their heart is really, I love Broadway, I love New York, I want to go to
Hmm.
school in New York, and they only audition for schools in New York. And then if they don't get in at the last second, they're like, oh crap, I didn't really have a backup plan.
Hmm.
What is my safety school supposed to be? And it's too late for us to help because
Hmm.
they missed that deadline and there's nothing we can do. So I keep telling people, look, even if you are not sure if this is really the viable thing for you, you should put the paperwork in, because
Hmm.
there's nothing we can do to help you in the long run if it pans out a different way. Um, so that's a big one. There are GPA requirements that we can fight for a couple students a year if there's a couple who are falling below that. But the reality is it's all computerized. There's
Hmm.
42,000 students, so
Hmm.
everything is digital. No one will even see the application if the GPA is too low. So if we do see it in musical theater, like in the audition process, and then we go and look it up in the system, and it's like, well, they weren't approved for the university because their GPA was so low, we can fight a little bit if it's close-ish. But if it's really off, there's not much we can do.
And do you have a
um,
sense of about what that is? I mean, you don't have to give an exact number, but in the range of what you're talking about, that's hey, below this it would be just too hard for us.
the GPA requirement for coming in as a California state resident is 2.49 or higher. And the GPA requirement for being an out of state student is 2.99 or higher. So yeah, it's roughly 2.5 or 3.0, depending on if you're in state or out of state. And I actually think if you are super local to Cal State Fullerton, so if you live in Orange County or Los Angeles County, I think it's even a little bit lower, because the system is set up to prioritize local students. Um,
Unbelievable. They
yeah,
don't have
so,
enough advantages coming from Orange County.
I know.
First, now I can have a 2.2 and still get into school. Unbelievable.
Yeah. So, but that is actually tricky, because once you get up to 3.0 for out of state, not all artists and creative students
Hmm.
are the best, math test students. I
Totally.
certainly was not. So it does get a little hairy, but hopefully those numbers can be accommodated. And again, if not, if they're a little spongy, we can make a fight for a few students a year if needed.
I love it. Just a few more questions. So you talked a little bit about some of the EDI conversations or some of the conversations you're having. I'd love to just hear of like, I know obviously you're kind of new in this position, but as the school has been adjusting, and you said sort of updating to um, to 2022 to where we are now, like what adjustments have been made in terms of what, whether it's bringing in new faculty or whether it's any new programs, or what adjustments have been made to sort of fit the ever-changing business, both with those diversity conversations, but then also with the virtual world. And you talked about some of the ways that you're changing for the showcase. Just like love to hear kind of how you're updating to 2022.
Yeah, I mean, the showcase model was completely sort of uh, disassembled and put back together in order to accommodate what the industry has been asking for. And the fact that showcases really have not really worked in close to 10 years, like they just don't do the job they used to do, for a lot of reasons. Probably the strongest reason is that there are so many more programs now doing musical theater than there
Hmm.
were 20 years ago. And because of that, they're all trying to do showcases. There's just not enough time in the year
Hmm.
for agents to go see them all and actually spend that much time. So how do we accommodate that is a great question. And some of that's proprietary. I'll be honest, like we don't want to tell too many of our secrets, but we've kind of made some outreach, the hint I'll give you is it's highly digital. I mean,
Hmm.
it's based in the digital world, but a lot of it is also based on relationships, and it's another one of the reasons why they hired me specifically, is that I came in with 20 years of industry experience. I wasn't baked purely in academia.
Hmm.
And I don't think all faculty need to be, really well versed in the industry, but you do need some if you want to build that bridge correctly, without risking teaching people about a business that faculty remember from 20 or
Hmm.
30 years ago. And that's why I think it's imperative that I, as a faculty, continue to perform. So while I'm shooting Mrs. Maisel, that's all research for the university.
Oh, call it research.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
right.
am.
You're going to
I
be on
am.
TV. You're calling it research. You're like, oh, sorry, I just have to go do this national commercial. It's research.
Yeah, correct. But even negotiating those contracts and dealing
Hmm.
with agencies and casting directors throughout those you're seeing on the ground what is currently happening in the industry and how it's changing. I was shocked at how much has changed technologically since the last time I
Hmm.
was on set. Only within a couple years, like things just move so quickly. And if you want to know about that, you have to keep a leg in the business. So that's all in the works. But yes, the showcase was shifted a lot to accommodate sort of 2022. In terms of you know, equity, diversity, and inclusion, accessibility has always been a major priority for Cal State as a institution, as it is, as it should be with most state schools.
Hmm.
So we have pipelines that I've actively been working to strengthen with community colleges. We're one of the few BFA programs that accepts transfer students without adding years to their college time, because it is not our goal to have you be in college forever and to pay us all the money you could possibly pay it. We're just not interested in those things. We're interested in making sure that students get the education and the training that they want in a reasonable amount of time and as affordable as possible. I mean, it sounds sounds radical, but it is truly what we're doing. But because of that accessibility thing, the biggest thing is going to be about finances. It's going to be about making sure that this is accessible for all people, and that we're creating pipelines that make that possible. Whether that's from the community colleges, whether it's from a raw 4-year degree or whatever, like that's the probably the biggest push. And it is stuff about thinking about, well, do we have waivers for students who come from families who can't afford that $70 application fee?
Hmm.
Well, yes, we that has to be part of what we do. If I could, I would have that sort of universal, like everybody trains here for free,
Hmm.
like sort of the Yale University grad school model. It's brilliant. Like I
Right. You
think,
just need a billionaire to give you all the money,
yeah,
so it
if
all happens.
you have a David Geffen in your
Yeah.
back pocket and who wants to come in and put billions of dollars in endowments, I would be happy to help connect you with the right people at Cal State. But
Any
no,
listeners out there who are billionaires,
that's
please.
please come write a check or call me. Um, uh, but yeah, I'd say the big changes are focusing on those things and doubling down. We're also increasing, like, before I got here, honestly, there was no required coursework
Hmm.
in sort of theater and cultural change,
Right.
theater and dealing with with social issues. Those were courses that existed, but they weren't mandated. Like you could choose to avoid them for 4 years if you wanted. There are things like, there's a Chicano theater course, which for a school like Cal State in Southern California, we have a very large Latinx community here.
Hmm.
I think something like 60% of our students university wide have Hispanic heritage. So having classes that celebrate the history of theater from the perspective of South America or Central America, like that's a course that
Hmm.
everyone should have access to here. And it wasn't quite like that before, so we've kind of doubled down on those and made those inherent in all of our degrees. And of course, we're diversifying the faculty as much as we can. I am not helpful in this regard. While I celebrate that stuff, I am. If you can't, if you know, if you're not a
You
seeing
sound white
group,
enough. They
I
know. They
sound.
can
They
they can hear it
know.
in your
They.
voice. Yeah.
Oh God, yeah. But so I'm not contributing very well because I'm just another cis, white man. But it is imperative, even as I now head a program and help in terms of finding new faculty as positions become available. That is a thing that we have to recognize. And Hispanic folks are actually a great example of it, because it's probably the thing we are shortest on in faculty terms. And some of this becomes larger than me and academic questions that I'm fighting for, but I can't wave a wand, which
Hmm.
is some of the requisites we have for faculty even coming in are things that a lot of people from the Latinx community simply don't have, mainly because they didn't see themselves represented that way for so
Hmm.
many generations that they didn't set their sails in that direction. So part of this is long-term game. How do we make sure that we are creating pipelines for those communities now to make sure that 10, 20 years from now, that will not be a question people have. It'll be such an
Yeah.
easy fix in the future. That's
You
my hope.
you mean like you got an MFA from Loyola Marymount, which you might not have thought to do, or you might not have because you saw yourself potentially as this position that you ended up at.
Correct, correct. But right now, say a young person who's in high school or younger looks at our faculty, they don't see themselves represented in it.
Hmm.
So they're not thinking, oh, that's a place I could work one day, or that's something I could do, because they have that roadmap has not been created yet. That path hasn't been shown. And that's the importance of representation, right? But so it's all that stuff that is also changing under our feet right now.
Mhm.
Again, not something you can wave a wand and just make happen, but is definitely something you can point your sails in that direction and make sure that, again, people in leadership positions here on campus have their eye on that and are deliberately searching for it, because
Mhm.
it is important. We don't always succeed. You're not just going to put somebody in who's not ready to do it. But at the same time, there has to be some flexibility in giving people chances that they might not have otherwise had too.
I love it. Your 2022-23 audition season, are you doing some virtual auditions as well as in person? Is it all in person? Have you decided all that yet?
Yeah, I mean, the pre-screen is a pre-screen, so it's all virtual, and you just send it off through the accepted platform. Then the callback phase, which will be in the early part of the year, probably the first few weeks of February each year, that's when there will be live interaction. And yes, there will be virtual options because, again, California makes up most of the
Mhm.
West Coast. So, there are people who are in Northern California where coming down here is a very long trip. So
Mhm.
we don't need to require that. But if people want to come and see the campus and do that as part of their final leg of the audition process, we obviously welcome that. We prefer to be able to meet people in the room and really engage that way as we would if they were students here, but we don't require it. And so, yeah, there will always be, and I think that's probably for the foreseeable future, that's going to be an option just for the convenience of it.
Well, I promised you at the beginning of this interview that I was going to ask you questions about parents, and I've asked you zero questions about that. So let me ask at least one question, which is just if you have any advice. Let's say I'm a parent listening out there, and I'm helping my child begin their journey. Maybe they're a sophomore, junior, they're starting to look at schools. What's something that you want to throw to that parent as a bit of advice? What would you want them to know?
Well, if they've listened to this whole podcast, they have a lot of that already. I think
They've been
the
doing the dishes, they've been running, they've
that's
been using
right.
their
And they
personal
need to
trainer.
hear it
They
again.
haven't been listening that closely.
Well, here's what I say. I say, if you are a parent who is concerned about how to finance these incredibly high college costs, I think having a school like ours on your radar is incredibly important, and could be a major life-changing
Mhm.
decision for your child in the future, whether that's 5, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. For parents who have just boatloads of liquid financial ability, that's great. What I can tell you is there are smarter, better investments of that money than to sink it all
Mhm.
into an overpriced degree. That is just, again, I get in so much trouble with some of my colleagues when I say this stuff out loud, but it is really what I feel. It would be better. One of the most difficult things for young actors when they graduate a program is paying their rent in a major city like Los Angeles or New York while
Mhm.
trying to pursue this career path of auditioning and being available, because the industry just wants you to be permanently available without ever working any other jobs. One thing that you could do with that $100,000 that you did not spend in college is help them set themselves up for the first couple years in helping them pay for their rent, helping them continue to take classes and voice
Mhm.
lessons, helping them get headshots printed or whatever the stuff, getting their website built, whatever it is, getting demo footage created. Like, there are other ways you can help them, that are going to be more powerful than just having a piece of paper with a brand name written across it. I just really passionately believe it. So if I could put one thing into the universe that radically changes the future, this is where I think if somebody listening to this podcast right now heard these words and a light bulb went off and they go, oh my God, that guy is right. It doesn't have to be my school; it could be any, but
Mhm.
that accommodate this. But that amount of money, that debt that you can cancel before it even begins, that could be the greatest gift any human has for the remainder of their lives. It could
Mhm.
be life changing. So that is probably the highest thing. The second, I'm going to give you second highest thing though, is finding people who teach in this field but have a wider perspective than just being on Broadway.
Hmm.
In order to be a great performer, you have to have more breadth of knowledge than that and more experience in life than that. Like, so finding faculty who is, particularly in musical theater, I think this can be tricky because we're teaching three art forms and it takes a lot of energy to do that. It takes a lot of focus, and sometimes it becomes our only focus. But sometimes we forget to train human beings. Part of what a college education does, And I'll just give this statistic: 75% of all college graduates do not use the degree that they got in their
Hmm.
occupation later in life. So that's all college graduates. That's not a theater thing, not a musical theater thing.
Right.
That's
People say
all.
that about BFA sometimes. I'm like, what about that English degree? What about that? What, you're right, but also so many degrees are like that.
Yeah, so I mean, 75% of all degrees
Hmm.
are like that. Um, Knowing that that is the case, I think it tells us a little something about what college is really doing. It's preparing you to think critically and go out into the world as a strong human being who has a breadth of knowledge and desires and passions and creative impulses. And then how they manifest in life is up to each person, and up to fate, stuff that is luck and we can't even control at all. So it is imperative that we train people to be great human beings and to grow into adulthood through our programs, not just learn how to, again, sing a high A and to do a double pirouette. Like,
Hmm.
there has to be more to it than that, and finding faculty who can verbalize that, can articulate that, I think is really valuable, because it tells you you're sending your child to a place where there's more at stake than just the Broadway dream.
I love it. Well, Josh, this has been so fantastic. I really thank you for your time. If people want to follow you, they can do at Josh Grisetti. Is that on Instagram, I assume?
Yeah, Instagram. Pretty much. The good thing about my name is there's not a lot of me's. So if you put me into
You're
any
everywhere.
search, you're gonna find me.
And I'm sure they can just DM you with random thoughts. They can, no, I'm joking, but I'm sure there's
Random thought. I prefer
official
random
ways
thoughts, things that have
through the
nothing, just complete non sequitur.
through the college website. I'm sure there are other more official ways to contact you as well. Josh, thanks so much for the time. This was such a joy.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Boy, howdy. I hope you enjoyed that chat with Josh. I thought he had such smart stuff to say about his program. He articulated it so beautifully, and I also really appreciated his transparency and good humor. You can tell he has a really fantastic understanding of what his program is and what it can be, which is always really refreshing. Okay, I'm going to give you a bit of a 3-course meal platter of takeaways with 2 appetizers and a main course. First off, I'm going to start off by co-sponsoring with Josh's general takeaway with what he called trends and what we often call risks. If you haven't been listening to the artistic episodes, the artist explorations, fully understandable. We support you. Listen to what you want to listen to. We go into this a little bit more detail in a couple of those episodes, but I will say in general, his inclination of anything that's more risky should really be motivated by who you are is really true. As is the rule that there are no hard and fast rules in a subjective artistic process, right? Never do this piece, always do this piece. None of that. There's no rules except there are no rules or whatever. Second, I just want to expand a bit on what we hit on with those quote unquote reverse cut schools. And that's kind of like weird phrasing. I'm not sure I don't know why I think of it that way as a reverse cut, but just those schools where there's an audition partway through your time there, whether that's the end of a freshman year, end of sophomore year, etc. For those students who are interested in the broader BA education, those can be really appealing options, since often they will lead with a broader total course load before they specialize. But it is worth considering the part that Josh mentioned of the heartbreak if it doesn't happen. So if you're considering those programs, you would want to truly be okay with finishing out your 4 years there, even if you didn't get into the more specialized program, whether that's a musical theater certificate or an acting major, whatever the specific audition at the end of freshman year or end of sophomore year would be. Just the same way we'd never want your initial school list to have one audition-based school on it, you're essentially locking yourself into that plan if your goal is to go to the audition-based program of a non-audition school, right? It can kind of punt the pain down the road, but you're still setting yourself up for a lot of pain or potential risk in that choice. There's a reason that those cut programs that used to exist really started phasing out a number of years ago. They're just so brutal psychologically on the students who are cut. If you spend all these years auditioning and you show up and then 2 years in, all of a sudden you're gone. Sometimes it happens really naturally where someone realizes this isn't a good fit for them and they decide to switch majors, etc. But sometimes it can be truly devastating, and then you've sunk all that time and all that money into a program that's now not going to happen for you. That's why those kind of cuts have been virtually eliminated from this process in the way they used to be. And perhaps most importantly, to Josh's point, in that you're not able to have a safe and supportive artistic environment for work if you're always looking over your shoulder worried about being cut. I mean, imagine working on a professional show where the first half of the rehearsal process was still an audition. It's not exactly the best working environment. Okay, that was a nice sized appetizer of 2 little courses. I'm just going to throw in the main course of a co-sponsor on Josh's point about cost, a general co-sponsor, though not maybe all of the specifics. I know we talked about it before, and we're going to continue to talk about cost on future episodes, as I think it is just a huge issue. the cost of college in general, beyond theater programs, has just ballooned so far beyond what is reasonable. Much like medical bills, you're often paying such an incredible markup on the cost of the product itself, right? Like if you consider just what the professors are making, what the productions cost, it is way less than what you're paying or what all the students, if you add up the pool of what they're all paying. This is a nationwide problem that I think has to be addressed at a much broader level than this podcast. But I will say that there are a few things that you as a customer can do, and I would strongly encourage you to do those things. One, you can be an informed customer, and you're already doing that if you're listening to these pods and you're seeking out MTCA's counsel and advice generally. Two, you can give yourself as many good options in the end as possible so that you can truly have leverage to negotiate. And as always, the most important part of negotiation is actually being able to say no. And three, you can have a frank and open conversation as a family about what total money is going to go toward college and beyond, and then empower your child to make an informed decision with this enormous family investment and or the personal investment if it's going to come out of loans for them personally. One thing I'm not going to completely co-sponsor is Josh's number of $100,000 specifically. I think that whatever that number is, it could be less, it could be more, but it's really going to vary from family in terms of what a degree is worth to them or their child. That said, I do totally agree that many degrees have become way overpriced relative to their true quote unquote value, especially when you talk about something like ROI of a life in a theater, right? That said, to get a little bit more general economist on you for a second, the value of getting a college degree is still a huge predictor in America today of future wealth, happiness, all the good indicators you could look for. So even if some degrees might be significantly overpriced relative to other degrees, there's still no question in the value, even in the inflated form that it is, of what a degree is statistically to most people. And again, a degree is not for everybody. We're talking broadly statistically. Plenty of people, of course, can be happy without a college degree, but that's a different point. I do think you could make the argument that some of the most competitive schools, even with that really high cost of entry, could actually still be worth it for a student for whom the financial return isn't the number one factor, right? The fact that it might give them the best statistical possible odds for success is worth a smaller mathematical ROI, right? Even if, you're per what money you put in and expecting to get out is lower, you might say the fact that the total expected output is and potential career success is worth it to you, because money is not the most important factor for you or for your child. But those are decisions for each family to make. But to have that kind of discussion, right, where you sit down and you look at all your options, it could be this school that costs $50,000 total over 4 years with no loans, and then maybe we have a significant chunk of change to be able to help you beyond college, or this other school that costs $250,000 where you would need to take out $100,000 in loans, and you'll have significantly less support from us over the first 5 years of your career, right? Those are great specific family conversations to have if you can. And again, to go back to point number 2, the only way to truly have them is to have multiple great options at the end. So that's one of those big reasons. We always talk about why that college list gets longer and broader. It's because we want you to have a broad list, not only to get better at auditioning artistically, but also to have the possibility of many acceptances, negotiation, and some truly financially reasonable options for you. Well, if you enjoyed this delicious 3-course meal of takeaways, why don't you rate and review us for dessert? That's a free option. No loans needed to rate and review us on your own podcast platform. You can also harass me on any social media platform. I'm at Charmur7, CHARMUR7. If you're interested in working with MTCA for help with your individual prep, please check us out at mtcollegeauditions.com or mtca.nyc, or follow us on all the social platforms. To my young artists out there mapping their journeys, what is your secret for authenticity? Leave it in your review. We'll see you next week.